Hello, everybody. How are you all doing today? So, first things first, can I get some acknowledgement that people can hear us? So that's the first one. That's the first thing.
I can hear you.
Well, I know.
That's good stuff.
Yeah, just yes. So, how are you all doing today? Are we all right? I think we are live now. So, let me just check. I think it should be going through. Fine. So good. Yes, we are live. Thank you and welcome everybody to the Transport Tavern. And I can't remember what edition we're up to. Thank you for everybody confirming that they can hear us loud and clear. And I'm exceedingly happy and pleased to introduce my good friend, and I think many of you know who he is, Mr. Tim Dunn. Hello, Tim.
Hello, good evening. Thanks for joining us. It's good fun to be here.
Yes,
remotely.
it's we're well in the same city. We're in London, and we'll start. What are you drinking tonight, Tim?
I'm on a very, very cheap French rosé because it's very nice and warm outside. But yeah, it's a rosé Provençal. Yes,
Yeah.
crack open the red later on this evening.
Well, I'm on the tea. So it's lemon and ginger Twinings. I'm afraid I've had a bit of a headache today, so I'm not on the beer. So, but I hope whatever you're drinking, it's as joyful for you as it is for us. Our drinks, I mean. So, we're here to talk about stations, and we're here to talk about their development, their use, and we're gonna talk for about 40 minutes. But I want to say, if you've got any, it's Q&A. So if you've got any questions, do ask them. And if you've got a favourite station, we said this on Twitter. If you've got a favourite station, perhaps would like to know something about it, we'll try and do our best to help you out with that. So, Tim, shall we move on to the slides?
Yeah. Thank you for having me. I don't want this to be a lecture because for a couple of reasons. One, because I'm not professional enough to be a great lecturer. And I haven't got all the knowledge to supply, academic knowledge to supply that. What I wanted to do was, I suppose, I just wanted to kind of just try and show a few narratives that run through some of the general form of British railway station architecture. This isn't going to be a guide to it, nor is it going to be an exhaustive, exact account of everything that we can see, because of course, there have been in excess of 4,000 railway stations in the UK. It'd be madness to try and claim there are too many standard themes that run through them. But I thought we could look at a few of those themes tonight, and lifting from a few works that I've been made familiar with over the past couple of years, and talk around, I suppose, the railway station design. And why they look like they do, I suppose, and pick out a few examples of David. You and I know a few that we're quite big fans of,
yes.
and ones that we visited.
Yes.
And as you said, throughout this, I'd really like it if people can comment down the side. I can't see the comments just yet because I'm talking to the screen of my laptop. Just my laptop is currently being lifted up by lots of Pevsner books, which in this household is the standard unit of brick that is used for propping up things. So kind of being propped up by lots of interesting books. But yeah, I just thought we'd try and go through a brief history of the railway station in Britain, and some examples, a couple of throughout as we go. And then throughout, please do ask questions, and David can interrupt me, and we can talk about them. I have spotted on this already that Andy Savage, who is the director of the Railway Heritage Trust, in fact, chief executive, I think. So Andy, I'm sure, can answer any questions on specifics that we need to during this. So hello, Andy, and hello to all of you watching this. Thank you so much for joining. I just wanted to start off actually with this rather interesting painting, which just shows I referenced this in a recent keynote that we did at the Design Council of Network Rail, and we talked about where railway stations have come from. What I love about this painting is you can see in the foreground this ancient coach. This is a road carriage. This is the mail carriage that went to Stockport, and it's rotting in a farmyard, and you can see behind it the farm, and it's the old way. It is the death of the old way, and beyond it you can see this brand new gleaming station that's been developed in a fairly slight of, you can see there an overall roof over the two platforms, and you can see it's got a station. But I suppose this just speaks to the early nature of railway stations. And David, you and I both know, we've both spent many years poring over lithos and so on of lithos and illustrations of early railway stations, and looking at how they developed. And of course, railways, of course, were a shock of the new, weren't they, in the landscape? But they were. These fire-breathing devils, as we often call them, were something of an evolution to the existing infrastructure, because you put these train tracks down, and of course they originally built for wagonways and for industry, but the only reference points that the railway constructors had were for the railway carriages and for canals. So you look at what you've got, your early kind of designs. You've got toll booths. And then you've got, the coaching inns. And of course, the railways, when they first started, you were buying your train tickets. Stockton Darlington, for example. You bought your train tickets to hobble the trains across the bar in the local pub.
I think what's interesting about this image, though, for me, is that you've got what is possibly a coaching inn behind, and that too looks somewhat dilapidated.
Yes.
Yeah, like there's the juxtaposition between the because
it's a lovely image, this one. In fact, if you look between the station and the coaching inn or the farmyard, and it probably is actually a coaching inn. You've actually got the signals. You can see there the semaphore signals standing there, representing the order of the railway, the chaos of the farmyard and the old animals and the horses and the iron horses behind, representing modernity and progress, which I absolutely love. It's death of the old world and going into the new. It's absolutely delightful, this image. But also, and one I've referenced a number of times in talks that I've given. But again, we talk about. I think actually, who made the point? Who was? I think it was Simon Jenkins actually, who made the point that railway language actually and station language comes from the early carriage years. So we talk about boarding and alighting. We often talk getting aboard and alighting the train. These are these are road carriage terms that originally came in, and they've manifested themselves in our language, and they're maintained to this day. So
one of the interesting things is that passenger traffic was called coaching traffic on the railway,
as opposed to now when it's called self-loading cargo.
Well,
in certain circles, I've heard tell. But again, just speaks to an early railway idea of people trying to work out what is a railway station for, and what is its function? What should it look like? Where does it belong? What kind of architecture should inform it, and where should it go as a building? And David, you know this because you know my partner very well. My partner has worked or used to work as the head of the Georgian group in Britain. And so a lot of the past few years, we've spent a lot of our time looking at Georgian buildings. And of course, these early buildings, railway buildings, are Georgian. They're not Victorian. These are pre-Victorian railways. This one here, I think, is about 1838. Actually, this is actually technically Victorian. But the early railways are informed by Georgian architecture. And there wasn't just a flip over. It didn't just flip like that. It was early Victorian designs. I'm looking at one of those right now.
Mm-hmm.
So we'll go to the next image, actually.
So we know this one quite well, do we not, Tim?
Well, I live very close to it, and you did
I
too,
did
till very
too.
recently.
Spa Road.
Yeah. I think this again. We saw in that previous image how modernity and progression had sort of stormed through. This one, of course, we're looking at Spa Road Station, where actually you didn't really know what a station should be still at this point. This is what, 18, Andy, help me out here, 1836 is it, I think, or 1837?
Yeah, 36, 37. I
Um,
love the people on the top. It's just like, all right, everybody up. Right, no, you won't fall off. No, no,
yeah, I mean,
it'll be fine. It'll be fine. Don't worry about it.
they're getting their tickets down below. The station isn't quite finished at this point. You can tell it's still made of wood and stone, but there aren't wooden awnings to protect people. People are queuing up to get to the viaduct that ran between, and indeed still does run between, London Bridge and Greenwich, on the world's first kind of proper urban railway. And this thing, zoomed up and down. This looks to me like this is obviously the steam bit rather than the Croydon atmospheric railway, which came a bit later. People are getting off their road carriages. They're walking across the ground. They're walking onto the station, just up on top of the viaduct. Now, this viaduct and this station have been consumed by later ones. Have surrounded, and of course, I think at one point this viaduct is now around about 12 tracks wide or thereabouts.
Yeah,
at one point.
something like that.
Rather than just these two. But again, it just shows the early kind of utilitarian nature of these railways.
Mm-hmm.
They didn't know quite what they were aiming for and how to think of the passenger, because the London and Greenwich Railway was built to carry passengers up into town as well as freight. But further up north, the Stockton Darlington Railway, it was primarily a goods route, and so passengers were, and again, the Liverpool and Manchester, very much secondary. In fact, I think they were saying that the passengers were slowing down the progress of the railway.
Something like that.
Somebody asked on Twitter the other day about the oldest continuously operated railway station in the UK, if not the world. I think it's probably Edge Hill. Fair to say, it's Edge Hill. It's never been out of service, and still has the same buildings rather. And they've been cut down in relatively recent times, but they're still performing the same function effectively that they were back in construction.
I think my favourite. Sorry, Tim.
No, go.
My favourite early station is I can't remember which railway it was, but it was the poop deck of an old Dutch cargo ship.
How is that the railway? Was that?
I'm not entirely sure. It was either under it but it involved the poop deck, so maybe they took it off. I don't know. It's just clearly there. I mean, pubs were used, weren't they? Taverns as well.
Yeah, I mean, right across the north, particularly where the wagonways were becoming railways, you did see the sale of tickets in local things, local places. There's actually one which I really like, which is I'm going to show. There's an image. Mitchum Station. Mitchum has an incredibly early building as its station building. Mitchum is the sort. It became eventually the London Brighton South Coast Railway, but I think it's around about 1800-ish. Mitchum, the railway station.
Yeah.
So it's way before the railways even arrived. It's a residential house, then became the railway station. Eventually, after the Surrey Iron Tramroad sort of steamed through the area. But again, if you're looking at one of the oldest railway station buildings in the world, Mitchum is certainly one of them.
Can we head to the next one?
Yeah.
Lots of columns.
Lots of columns. Making a statement. So we're going on to working out what are buildings for. And what are they trying to do with these buildings? Because you can quite clearly see here. Here is the Euston Arch. It's not an arch at all, of course. It's very much just a gateway, proper layout. And you've got at the far north of the line at that point is Curzon Street, which I went into a few weeks ago, which will now become part of the new HS2 route to run between Euston and indeed Birmingham. And below, of course, we've got Huddersfield Station, this great, great portico. These stations are there just to make a statement and say, these are monuments. The railways were monumental, and trying to say they are in the landscape, and they are trustworthy. They are statements that make both the investors and indeed the passengers feel comfortable about their existence. And in fact, someone says that, I can't remember who actually said it, that the London-Birmingham Railway almost thought of itself as being the Watling Street, the new Watling Street through the UK. And these were kind of its monuments at either end, so it employed classical architecture to make this statement and to kind of give it that the gravitas and give it that the entitlement of being where it was. Because you got to remember, these railways were invading spaces that were previously not thought to be industrial or to be worthy of invasion.
And there's a lot of things about sort of objections to railways, sort of about Ruskin and various people who see them as almost a despoiling of the landscape and despoiling of it. How, if would these have been trying to sort of say in architectural terms, we're matching architectural styles around the city? Because I know a lot of railway designers like William Tite designed the Royal Exchange, but he also designed railway stations. So how much is it about legitimising themselves in sort of architectural terms?
Hugely, absolutely hugely. So, well, I think we'll come on a little bit. Some of there's some lovely discussions in The Builder magazine at the time, where they're looking at kind of the architectural sort of critical magazine at the time, I suppose. But The Builder, they're talking about what is railway style, what is railway architecture, what is it for, what is it doing, is it engineering, is it architecture? And these great monuments are saying very clearly, we are legitimising through classical means, as lots of buildings did. They gave themselves classical facades in order to legitimise their existence as being great corporations or being organisations or municipal buildings. And by making these statements and with these proportions and this classical design, I'm going off stations for a bit. If we look at, say, Brunel's route from Paddington through to Bristol, I mean, you've got mock Jacobean, you've got Gothic, you've got Romanesque. Looking at some of the designs, some of the tunnel mouths, they're drawing on ancient architectural styles from antiquity in order to prove that they should be there and that they are there to stay.
I think. For me,
broadly, I think it's fair to say.
Sorry. I'm reminded from where I come from, where I was born and grew up, two near stations, William Tite stations, Hampton Court, and Windsor and Eton, Riverside and Barnes. They're doing a similar thing because they're trying to match that sort of, the local aesthetic.
Yeah, hugely. And again, Euston isn't trying to match in local aesthetic, and neither is Birmingham. They're trying to stand out from the local aesthetic,
right? Okay.
But also compare themselves to other great, structures of that early Victorian age. There is money here to be made, is what they're saying.
Mm-hmm. I mean, these were the biggest corporations that the nation had ever seen, and they've got to show that sort of what we call it probably corporate social, maybe not, responsibility. They're scary to some people. So yeah.
Well, yeah, they were scary, but also they want to say, they did want to show that the LMS was was what world's largest company for a while. Is that
I
right?
think so, yeah. Or one
Um,
of the largest.
and it needed to show that in many ways for not just the passengers, but also its investors and for politicians as well, to show its clout. Um, and that is very much part of its image.
Hmm?
Cool.
Are you
So
going
look at
to...
the next one. What did I write next? I can't remember. I wrote down. Well, yes. So again, here's. I forgot what I wrote. I'm sorry. I only put these together this morning. Um, because and over lunch, because I was doing a brain like I just like need to get my head into order. So here's some nice thoughts, some nice examples here of just Brunellian architecture, and on the right is one of my absolute favourites. I visited for the very first time last year. It's Culham Station between Oxford and Didcot, and it's one of those buildings, and again, you can see another example of Brunel's architecture for local stations over there on the left. I think that's Swindon, from memory. Um, you can see here that it's picking up this interesting sort of Gothic from local areas, this romantic idea of what a station should be in the community. And so, again, this is so hard to talk in an hour or 40 minutes of station architecture and all the things and influences and directions. I'll pick out a few. But here's an example of where we've got these local stations that are built. If you were to take off that the canopy around the edge of that station, you've got a church hall, and it's no mistake. These are in the heart of the villages, and it's this romantic ideal of going from the countryside and going up into the city. And this idea of this great journey and going from or the other direction, of course. Taking you from the big cities of as it was Oxford. I mean, indeed, Oxford Station wasn't actually allowed to be in Oxford in the early years because they were too concerned about bringing dreadful people from London, women of ill repute. I think some of the dons said about Great Western Railway would bring. They were terrified about it. It was down in the water meadows, but it was about taking people on a journey from different places, and Brunel's one station, so these lovely compact little sort of almost like bird boxes of stations are little church halls that then have these wonderful designed to shelter the passengers. Now, again, we talked about how stations and the form looks, and we talked about the architectural style, but just look at the form of that station. You've got here, suddenly you start seeing signs of more passenger focused, right? So you have here, there is a canopy to protect people over the top. There's a waiting room for people to in colder weather. There is actually probably a women's loo there as well for them to spend a penny, as they said on the Great Western Railway. On the signs you say, and an outdoor loo for the men.
Right, yeah.
A little pissoir, urinal at the side, and so you've got the architecture merging in with some of the local architecture, and it's the influence of the vernacular and the romantic ideal, but also you have got this form of how you are catering for the passenger.
I will say I've got a couple of questions, but I'm keeping a log of them, so I will address them at the end. So we will hopefully have a yes. Shall I move on?
Oh,
Sorry.
a couple of things here as well. Just a couple of things here. Just seeing on that image there of on the left, you've got here the other platform. You have the up and the down platform. So you've got different directions of lines. So you've got two platforms, and we'll come on to that in a minute as well, as to how station design works and why you've got one platform over there and one over there. And also you can see there's some steps going down. We don't have footbridges at this point. Footbridges come a little bit later. There was, I think it's about 1842 is the first footbridge.
Okay.
From memory, and Andy may well correct me on this. but I think it's about 1840, 1842 is the first footbridge, because the trains weren't frequent enough and weren't fast enough, and they didn't really think about it being a safety feature. So you did actually have at stations, and indeed across the line, basically level crossings. And as trains speed up today, we see faster and faster trains. I put on Twitter a little while back a picture of Malton Station, where at Malton Station you have under the great overall roof, as they had at one point, there is a single track that runs through and a platform either side. And so you've got a single track, and you can get out of the carriage either side if you wish. But between trains, because there's only one track, there's actually a retracting little trolley that came out from underneath
yes,
the platform
that, yeah.
and was put across.
Mm-hmm.
So you didn't have to go down and then back up again. So I was just thinking about, how do passengers actually use these things, and how do we train people to use these spaces and these places? Because we all kind of think, I know how to use a station, I know how it works. This stuff was still really, really new.
Lots of signage, I would presume.
Yeah.
They like to tell.
Well,
we still do, don't we?
Yeah. And how do you build a station in a local area? So on the next slide, which is Morton in Lug, which is an outlier, but I had to include this. This appears. This is a particularly bad scan of it. Sorry, but there's illustration that appears in a lot of Edwardian guides to railway stations, and it's Morton in Lug, where one of the local railway companies are pushing out in just sort of post railway mania to Shrewsbury. Was so tight on finances, they decided to actually incorporate an old oak tree alongside the railway line to use it as its station shelter. Now, there's no actual record of it being used to sell tickets from it, but a plate layer's hut, which is someone who was maintaining the track, they built some bricks into it, and apparently it was used for picnics and was used for people waiting for the trains that were few and far between on this Shropshire railway out the back of nowhere. Gosh, we've got into half an hour. I'm so sorry. We should speed up. I'm so sorry.
Right.
We should speed up. Here's this is Bricklayer's Arms. Again, not a million miles where I'm sitting right now. One familiar to me. Again, this is an Italian style architecture, really. So we're going into trying to develop architectural ideas and what architecture should be used. Because remember, before sort of 1900, architecture was very derivative. It took its cues from either vernacular, sort of untrained, or it took it from classically educated architects, and it was seen as an art form. It was a high art, or an applied art, and so they were looking for influences from antiquity, and so the Italianate style becomes prevalent. And it actually gets known as the railway style, or the English railway style, and so you will see this, and you can look at various stations across Britain, and you'll see this, particularly in the south. Actually, the overhanging roof and a very low pitch to it, and you'll see the arches, and you'll see these wonderful awnings that you'll see across, particularly in the south, and this. Is really just a facade to mask the engineering, and again, it's this debate that's happening still right up until the 1850s about, is it a building? Is it engineering? What is a station there for? And although I think it's fair to say that this particular station ended up becoming a good station, really, and fell into kind of disuse and disrepair. It was one of London's first railway termini. and was very important to such. And you can just see the Italian influence on things. And Italian was used because actually you hadn't got to be an architect to understand Italianate architecture, and you hadn't got to use sort of Portland stone and so on. You could knock it up using bricks very cheaply, and you could replicate designs in a kind of modular way. Like obviously this is an easier way to replicate standardized buildings and almost to take off the peg. And it became quite easy to build railway stations in this style using London or just stock brick from your local area.
Okay.
In any material.
We
rapidly go on. I'm sorry, everyone. I'm going fast.
Right. Yes.
So it's a couple of images here from a book that both you and I have got. Railway station architecture is not dealt with by academics very much at all. An early one was actually Carol Meeks, who wrote a really great book on the railroad station internationally. You get a copy of it? I recommend it hugely. It is not an easy read, and it's an academic text, but it's something that helped me formulate a lot of my thoughts about 2-3 years ago, and just showing some of the early designs of how the various overall roofs for the major city termini or stations actually worked, whether they were union stations, i.e. they were ones that were done to bring lines together under great terms, or they were joint stations, often under duress, or perhaps individual stations. And just look again, on the right-hand side, you've got a chronological from top to bottom. If we actually start at the buildings themselves and their side plan, the top one there, cropped it off, I think, is actually is Derby, as it was, Derby Tri-Junct Station. And Derby, up to this minute, the station form actually was a triangle in plan form, and it is so long, Derby Station, as the early ones often were, and things like Cambridge today still are. I mean, if we go to Cambridge Station, it is so long because you had the up platform and the down platform, as in and out, actually on the same plane, and the trains then would cross over to get out of the station. So you had one long plan, and just have different showcases there, different styles. You've got Derby, they got Paris Gare du Nord with its roofs, its ridge and furrow roofs. Washington DC at the bottom there, and that looks like, is that St Pancras in the middle? Yeah, it's St Pancras, that middle one.
With the spiky bits.
Yeah,
that's my
St Pancras. Horses. But again, just looking at those different roofs and looking, if you go across to the left, how they dealt with those spaces. Somebody actually asked this afternoon on a tweet, why have these great roofs? Why go to the expense of building a crystal palace over the top of your station? Well, lots of reasons. I mean, one, you need to get light into it. Well, it can do with open air. But you've got activities happening beneath. You've got goods. Remember, and look at St Pancras. I mean, David, you've done a lot of study, haven't you, into St Pancras Station?
Yeah. It's got, it's got the underside there because of they needed to keep it high, didn't they? They needed to keep the level of the track high, and it's wasn't it the maximum that they could do at that point, the overall arch?
And of course, and coming down, if you look at it from a plan form, you had departures on one side and arrivals on the other, and the train would then swap round. But in the middle, you'd have the goods, and there was things of a station. So you'd have this entire roof covered all the activities of the station. All the military precision that was happening. And you've got to remember that these railway stations at the time were probably some of the most regimented spaces that people would come across in their daily lives, because you've got that metronome of the train timetable, and you have to get people behaving and swarming and doing the things you want. So you've got to change the way and force their flow and make sure stuff happens As a company, you've got to enforce that
Hmm.
and make sure they are performing, so your company and your trains can perform efficiently. A bit like today, right?
Yeah.
You know, we like to think of stations as nice places to be, but really they are genuinely pushing us to do something. So what was happening beneath these roofs and the buildings either side or around them are all about how we are made to act as self-loading cargo.
Yeah. It's funneling you in the correct way, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely.
We
Yeah, onward.
ooh.
Yeah, so again, I love this one. This is from Meeks's book, which I love. I love this one. And we often talk about maps of and how stations perform, but this kind of just shows very quickly just how passengers flowed in and out of those early stations and different theories about the best ways of doing it. So look down the bottom, we've got the Brunel type station. You'll see at the very bottom down there, number 5, which is this one side where passengers would come in to one building. You also have duplicate arrivals and departures systems, and you have a booking office on one side, you have departures on the other. Think about Euston. I mean, Euston used to come in, and people like St Pancras. You come in on one side, go out on the other. You are regimented. You're pushed in and out of these things, and it comes down to when you have very short trains and infrequent trains, that works just fine. But as things start speeding up, you've got to start being more flexible. And if you think about that station we saw at Swindon, bring out the other side, you've got a platform in one direction and the other as well. So people can cross. Then you have to have faster trains. You build a footbridge over the top of it to make sure you avoid those trains, or an underpass, for example, as well. It's all about operational flexibility and putting people in the right places.
And this is a conversation that goes on into the 20s and 30s in terms of like signage and how do you best direct people and how do you get them to go where you want to go. So it's not a conversation that stops once we get the sort of standard form so much.
It's interesting. We think about the modern day stations, even the tube stations, where they misdirect us, right?
Yeah.
So they'll direct you in certain ways to make you
Hmm.
take longer to get around it, so you don't get to the platforms, just to slow down the flow of people. Or think about how stations are divided for different services. Let's take Paddington, where you've got the Heathrow Express, and you have lines on the platform to make sure you do different things and go different places, parts of the station that use other services. It's really very interesting, and that kind of that behavioural sort of push. You're right, is still with us today. Oh, onward.
Onward, yes. So
I said,
York.
um, oh, I just want to show York.
So
How
I've
things
just
changed.
before you start, Tim, I've got Phil asked, smoke pollution was must have been a factor, and one of my favourite stories about York is in the 1930s they were trying to paint the ironwork. And they went from one end to the other, but by the time they got to the other end needed redoing because of all the smoke pollution.
Yeah, I mean, stations were disgusting. Think of those trains, those just boring out that smoke. And yes, there were ventilation across those. And if you look at those, look at York Roof there,
Mm,
you can see that you had what do you call them? Clerestories, I suppose, on the far
yeah,
left. And so on the right, sorry, you've got the old York Station. It was the terminus in the city. You have ability for escaping emission, but it wasn't clean by any means. And indeed, on the ridge and furrow roofs over on the right, you've also got ways of escaping that steam and that smoke as it rises up as fast as you can. I just want to show that the form of the station. When York Station first opened up, trains went straight in on the right-hand side. So the old station would terminate. But then if you wanted to go further north, they would reverse the trains back out again, out of the city walls, and then go further north. It was just operationally inefficient. So they built them. Termini station are difficult because you have to either have a change of locomotive or have an engine to shunt them and pull them back out again. It becomes slow. So you have to, and as you see, as the 19th century progressed, you have a streamlining of facilities. and an understanding of what you need to do to perform adequately. And you can see the station there. Look at the centre of York there. Just the form of the station. You've got the porte cochere at the front. You know, we say where the carriages can pull in, or so people can get dropped off in their taxis or carriages or carts and get onto the station and get straight onto the train and don't get wet under those lovely big station arches and the footbridge underneath it. Within that, of course, you've got the signal box, you've got the station accommodation and the offices for the railway, and of course the railway hotel as well, you know, and a restaurant and a tea room. You know, there was the tea room at the side, which is now the York Tap pub. You have these stations becoming centres of people and activities, and it draws people in. Because they become portals of changing trains between services and also stopping and waiting to go elsewhere, and they become more important and people spend more time there. And things like cafes and waiting rooms and bars, for example, pop up to make money out of those people who are there.
I mean, in more rural locations, of course, a lot of stations still remain on the periphery relative to the village or town, don't they? And this is actually a problem that runs through because when buses come into the centre of town later on in the 30s, they can capture that market share quite quickly. So a lot of places now moves sort of swallows up the station, but in other places that relationship doesn't really change very much. I think that's more in the later rural lines, though.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I look at Settle Tucker line. On the next slide, here's an example. Is that Ribble? No, that's Settle Station. Not far from the town, actually. It's quite good. I put this one in actually to talk about kind of what's happening and design the station, the identity of the station, how they're making their stamp on it. We'll come back to that design of reality in a minute. But I've got a couple of things of St Pancras there. Showing kind of the finer designs. We can talk about micro, macro, and medium. Just going micro on the design of the station, and it's making a stamp and the design, the final design of the station, and saying, no, this is very much the Gothic style put on it by the Midland, and using materials transported in by the railway, of the railway, and for the railway, and depicting a certain style. Again, it's part of the hotel and indeed station. And something we're going to talk about is how we mentioned how York Station's got the hotel to one side. Quite a few stations didn't have much of a frontage, and actually the frontage we think of as being the station today is actually the hotel. So take St Pancras. You know, we often talk about St Pancras. Oh, isn't it a great Gothic, remarkable building? Most of that isn't actually the station at all. The station's is down to the side. There's the train shed. Most of the bulk that we think of being Gothic for St Pancras is actually the Midland Grand Hotel. And if I think of Inverness, for example, a lot of stations big stations in Scotland, similarly, their frontages are railway hotels, and they are the places that people would go and wait for their train if it was cancelled or delayed, or they get there early for the next day because they come up from wherever it was. They might have come up across from, let's take London for example. You'd come up on your train from the south coast. It would take you a couple of hours. You come across London. That could take you a couple of hours in the late 1800s. To get across on the horse-choked streets. Before you want to go up to York, you probably want to break your journey and stay the night and get the next early train up the next morning. So you stay over in a railway hotel. But it's not putting an identity of your own. And I put this example of, again, the Midland Gothic or Derby Gothic style of the Settle to Carlisle Railway, quite a late one. Just showing how even in a rural area, you could stamp your style as a railway building. And that's clearly a railway building. Even though it is one of hundreds of railway companies, it is clearly a railway station.
Mm-hmm.
rattle on really fast. I'm
Yes.
so sorry, everyone. I could speak for hours. That's Macatta's lovely Brighton Station. Again, showing this is Italian style. It is in a Brighton, a seaside town, fashionable, growing town, now a city, and it's about kind of going up and down the line between London and Brighton, about big, substantial places of glamour and respectability.
Mm-hmm.
But then also you've got local stations. Is it Tite? I can't remember who did Battle Station there. I think it's William Tite. I can't remember. And again, it's about looking at the local vernacular, taking the idea of the little Battle Abbey and influencing the style of a station, where it's this romantic ideal of, you've got the ends of a line that are your big stations and are quite often, and you're purposeful of being commerce as to go one to the other, but actually you're trying to escape sometimes or go to the rural romantic and selling tickets to those things that are like Battle Abbey, where you're trying to sell this notion of a tourist hotspot. You want to make the station look like it's part of the vernacular. That rural idyll.
Yeah, and I think a lot of these rural stations very much form part of an idealism or an ideal that people have about Britain's rural environment, don't they? They sort of embed themselves quite strongly in that, don't they?
Hugely. I mean, it's the place you arrived. If you go down to East Grinstead and then hop on the train to, say, Shepherd's, what's the line at the bottom called? I can't remember. Shepherd's Park. Something.
Not 100%, but yeah.
Sheffield Park. And all the stations down there are sort of lovely sort of hung tiles and so on.
Mm-hmm.
Very much for local materials, but there's lovely sort of terracotta. It's all very gentle. It's all very rural. It's inoffensive. It's about taking you somewhere lovely, and that maintains to this day, even as preserved railway.
Mm-hmm. We head on to the next one. Oh, Ambergate.
Ambergate. To show you that, again, the stations are places of people who work there, and you have huge workforces quite often. I was putting a picture here of Oh, Dr. Beeching, that sitcom from the 1990s, filmed at Arley on the Severn Valley Railway. Just an example of showing you, because they actually put into the background of that, they put in some fake cottages at the back of that set to become a film set of workers' cottages, to show you that actually, but I couldn't find an appropriate postcard to use for this, but to show that actually these railway stations, Ambergate, a very busy junction, they did have huge numbers of staff people. So you have people living on site and doing different functions. So you've got to think about the form of a station here and who is working on them. And who is being accommodated. So you have accommodation nearby. You have station masters' cottages. You have workers' cottages. You have signalmen's cottages. You have station gardens. You have this whole area. It isn't just about the stations and the platforms and the track. It is so much more to look after the people who are working in these little bubbles of which passengers and goods also flow through. We have a whole layer of community, of people working over generations sometimes in these spaces. And so often these buildings develop. And the reason we often have big buildings around the entrances to stations isn't just for a booking office. They are there to cater for the accommodation of a family, and indeed, actually, occasionally their staff. So the station master and his wife and children might actually have a maid or somebody to help out in those buildings, because they're quite chunky, some of them. Because they're working, every hour, the waking hour, literally.
Yeah, in the rule book some rule books that station masters had to be technically on duty 24/7. To address any issue that needed addressing, so they had to be close.
Yeah, and what better place to keep your people than tied to their job, and tied to your location? It's security. It's enforcing your company ideals. So, remember, these are being performed on a timetable basis. You cannot. This is military precision, and the hierarchy of individuals in these stations does ape the military of the time. Oh crumbs! 10 minutes. It goes so fast.
Okay, should we head on?
Yes, I'm so sorry, people. Everyone who's watching. Again, to show you here examples. Of is it Garsdale Station? So again, you keep all your workers close to the station. Here are some railway workers' cottages along the Settle to Carlisle line, and you can see just here how close they were kept to railway pattern and close to the railway line.
Yep. Okay. We're getting sort of more modern.
Brick boxes with concrete roofs. They were known as briefly by the architects. Now it's an example of how we start to see modernisation. So we get to Victorian times, we get into Edwardian times, and we start seeing a simplification. But we still see everything being contained for the passenger. It's about efficiency, and as we progress into the 20th century, it's how do you cater for large numbers of people, not just goods but people, through these stations in an efficient way. How do you minimise their time on site? How do you push them through? These are commuter railways. This is what was it called? Enfield West.
Enfield West, yes.
What has it become? Someone will tell me. Enfield West. I've written about this at least 3 times in journals. South? No, not South. No. What did Enfield West become?
I don't know. Off the top of my head, I don't know.
Anyway, this is a classic Scandinavian influenced building by Holden, built in brick in London. And again, similar styles occur across the network. Thank you. Oakwood. Thank you very much. I should know that. I really should know that. I have a terrible brain. It may like a sieve. And just see the modernity. But again, these are spaces full of light and being, again, symbols of the railway they represent. So as you have vernacular before and great symbols of classicism, now you've got this idea of the modern and electricity and cleanliness and future and efficiency, and it being part of your swift way into and out of London.
Isn't that beyond? Yeah. Sorry.
Go on.
No, I mean the next slide has a similar sort of thing, doesn't it?
Yes, I see it twice. Yes, here we go. Yes, you've got Tolworth on the southern region, on the Chessington branch, and
Surbiton that I know all too well.
Oh, how can you not?
Many pubs.
Wonderful features. I mean, look at that clock tower. You know, that is this deco clock tower, and you've got that double level bridge, which I think has got one level of it's got a pass. One is just for parcels and goods on a conveyor belt going across it. You know, this is about automation. It's about the future. It's about saying that railways are very much a future-looking system against the rise of the motor car. And I just thought I'd show you an example of how that then transferred into kind of more popular culture. You've got model railways, the Twix Twin Railway, which is a very small model railway. Is a short-lived system, the Twix system, where you could run 2 trains on one system by using an alternate middle rail. I digress. But just showing the architecture, this is the many ways system. This is a modular station design, slightly Art Deco in its appearance, sort of early modernist, I suppose you could also say, to some degree. And you can very clearly see the influences of that architecture, and just how it's pulling into beyond the actual architecture itself. It's going to popular culture, and you see the posters as well start representing, the Southern Electric designs as well, and so swiftly home the Edmund Vaughan stuff. And
one of the things I will say about sort of Surbiton, because I know it very well, but of course that was a pair of Richmond as well, which was rebuilt at the same time, is you'll notice on the right, there is this big area now I think has a Sainsbury's in. This is a period where the railways are starting to think about the development of the station space as being more than simply. They're actively trying to engage with the idea that they're a place you go for more than just alighting and boarding trains. They are they could have shops in them. They're very much that sort of, what's the term they use now? Network Rail have got a similar philosophy about their stations.
A destination.
Station. So they're starting, and they're held up in a document in 1946 by the Railway Companies Association to be, this is how we're going to design stations in the future. So yeah, it's I wonder if it could be considered a slight shift away from the sort of more more functional.
Well, it's interesting. If you think about the kind of activities that were happening at railway stations, even in the 1890s, you have things like coal offices, and if you lots of suburban stations now, you'll go and see a taxi office in a small building, often outside a railway station, little brick building, and quite often those are actually the old coal merchants from the old coal yards. So there were secondary activities often happening in railway station surrounds. But you're right, happening within the actual confines of an integrated station building. Yeah, that probably marks
I think there's a sort of a diversification strategy also. I mean, going for a cup of tea at the station you'd be getting a train, but they start thinking about, we'll make a nice cafe that people will just want to be in anyway. So yeah. So we
Well, I just to that point. I mean, remember that a lot of the early railways, they had mandated stops. So things like York and Swindon had refreshment rooms, first and second class. And we haven't talked about this actually. Quite often, you had separate sections for first, second, and third customers, passengers. I could go on for this for hours.
Yeah.
Yeah, right. Keep doing. Oh, Euston. If you are in Euston again anytime soon, go over to the booking hall and look up on the ceiling, and you'll see this great. I think it's glass fibre. I think it's glass fibre. See, that is still there. That ceiling above the old kind of booking area. The old what do you used to call them? The
ticket office.
No, they call them a funny thing, didn't they? The British Rail, cause it's where my Model 125 thing comes from over there.
I know what you mean. I just can't put the
Travel Centre.
Travel Centre.
Travel.
Which just a quick aside, Tim. The first one of those was actually at Euston Station as well in 1910.
I didn't know that. This is the turning, I suppose, of where we start seeing post-war. We see a modernisation programme of stations, and a wholesale clearance of what is thought to be the old stuff, and we go to the new, and we see the international style. And probably not particularly well executed at Euston. I mean, Euston's got some wonderful parts to it. I imagine it could have been better than it really was, and it looks better now than it did 10 years ago. But we just start seeing again, this idea of efficiency and modernity, particularly up the west coast, the modernisation programme. And we see, and there are some great examples. I mean, if you think about Coventry, for example, is a fabulous, again, it's grade 2 listed building. It's a great station. Wolverhampton, there are bits of it that's still pretty good to look at. And you see this idea of still having large booking halls for large numbers of people and speedy, efficient access. And it's less romantic. It's more about getting on this and almost the airport style coming in to railway architecture.
I mean, one of the interesting I think about is the sort of the beaching of stations. People, there's very negative feelings about it. Although I noticed Jared in the comments says is he one of the few people who doesn't hate Euston?
I don't hate it.
I don't hate it either. But I mean, it's for me. If you go back to the time like beaching, there are a lot of people praising it and saying this is a complete reformation. This is excellent. This is modernity. This is all those things. So it sort of has a similar. It's wrapped up in that sort of time period and how people felt about the railway more broadly at this period. So, yeah.
I mean, Euston suffers from the same problems as so many other stations do now, or urban stations, which is there are too many people using it for the numbers it was actually built for. Um, they never thought this, well, not right now, but go back a year, um, and they never thought that number of people would ever be using Euston Station. I mean, it's extraordinary. I mean, genuinely extraordinary that it has coped it barely copes now at peak. Um, and again, we get frustrated in stations because they don't satisfy our ideals of what a space should be. A bit like an airport terminal, when things go terribly wrong. It's just that we are constrained in these spaces. And we have to look imaginatively now to how we might use those spaces vertically or horizontally, how we reconfigure them. I mean, I've seen at Euston. You obviously put the mezzanine above, which detracts from its beauty as architecturally, but it does enable more space, more milling space, and more retail usage, and to spend time when things go wrong. They've taken out some things, like that Boots was taken out back in February in the corner to allow people to kind of go through that corner. And so they are thinking now about how to use the spaces better.
Should we pop along to Ashstead?
Oh, right. This is a CLASP building, CLASP building, one of many across the network that were kind of erected into the 60s and 70s. Modular station construction, a low point, I think it's fair to say, of railway station architecture. They're functional. They leak. They're pretty ugly. They were a short-term solution to a problem, which was there was no money on declining managed decline of Britain's railways, and don't stand up and need to be replaced. I think it's fair to say.
Yeah,
it's my view anyway.
I agree. East Grinstead,
and one was replaced at East Grinstead. Now I like it, and I've included this because I think this is a new style of station. So it's in a couple of years old, this one. But again, you've got a double height, lofty booking hall. You've got it's again, if you ignore the flower stalls and commerce outside, actually it's quite an attractive building. If you take away those notices and stuff, you've got a decent sort of almost like a port. It feels like a portico. It feels like an arrival. You are going somewhere. It is a gateway to somewhere else. You've got ticket barriers inside. You have information inside. You've got commerce around it. It doesn't look bad. There's decent build quality. That is a decent building. It's been designed very well to a budget, of course. And we live in a world of closer budgets than we ever have done before, probably, in railway architecture, well, apart from the 70s and 80s. But yeah, I think that's a very successful building. I like how it is formed a new gateway to the railway that takes people in and out of that town. It is appropriate size, and it has gravitas, and it has, I'm not a fan of the typeface though on top of it. Not a fan of.
We go on to the last slide, I think, which is the newest centerpiece.
My local station, just a couple minutes walk from here. It's I think a great success of how they've managed to rebuild an ancient station, one of London's oldest stations, London's oldest terminus. Built it around it. It isn't perfect by any means, but they have injected, Network has injected a layer of warmth and wonder for me, and brightness, and added new spaces to mill around, information systems. It's a great compromise of how you marry a Victorian railway, high land values, operating systems, vast numbers of people, and modern needs. I think it's a decent set of compromises. Well done, everybody.
I will confess that when I was living in the area when they were rebuilding it and right up to the reopening, I wasn't a fan initially, but it has grown on me a great deal since it was opened. So yeah, I do, as you say, it's not perfect, but it's certainly a very, very good, excellent sort of station that I enjoy.
There are lots of compromises I don't like the outside clip-on brick.
Yes, dislike that. Yeah.
Hugely, and some of the build quality. I think some of the finessing has been debatable, and there are some things that I would always critique. But there are good reasons those decisions being made, I'm sure.
Phil says there's no mention of New Street.
Well,
yes. Well, yeah.
It was never good. Well, it was a long time ago, but it had to be rebuilt
Yeah.
for various reasons. Its primary function is retail. I don't like it very much, I must admit. I like the style of it. I don't like the plastic feel of it, but I get the impression that it is I don't imagine it to have a very long life. I think they know that, and I think there are so many problems with that interchange. I can imagine the compromises that have had to be made and the value engineering that's gone under it. I can imagine it having another rebuild in the coming years.
So we've overrun slightly. We've got 2 quick fire questions
minutes.
if you know the answer to them.
Go on.
Grandest station that has now been lost.
Oh, crikey. Well, in the UK, I would internationally, I'd say the old New York station was quite extraordinary. But in the UK, oh crikey, in the UK, let's bring it back to, because we're talking about UK stations tonight. Come back to that.
Broad Street pretty grand? No, not really.
Broad Street, yeah, lots of interesting canopies. Bath Green Park is a favourite. It wasn't hugely grand, I suppose. Manchester Central, I suppose, hasn't really been lost. It still exists as a building. Keep talking. I keep talking.
Okay.
Keep talking. Next question. Hang on.
So my fun fact that I'm doing some work on best kept gardens competitions at stations, and the first one was in the 1850s by the Edinburgh and Glasgow Railway, I think. There goes back to what Tim was talking about earlier about the community. They very much got involved with the gardens. It was a sense of sort of pride in their. How it tells you something about the attachment people had to their stations, about the pride they had in their stations.
I'll tell you what I am sad about. I am sad that Euston. I don't like the arch. It's quite ugly. I like it. I like its existence, and it as an artifact. But the Great Hall in the middle was quite impressive. That was a great loss. That was a great shame that was lost. Dundee looked great. Dundee was but that was lost back in the 60s. Dundee, that one. That was a cracker, absolute cracker. I'm gonna have to think about that one.
Okay, well, the other one, if you know, is I don't know. Is when did platform heights start to match carriage entrances, and why did this differ from the continent, who have never got the higher platforms of the UK?
That's a very good question, and one I'm not qualified to answer. Sorry.
Cool. So Tim,
Mr. Gareth Dennis, who we both know, will know the answer to that one. Sorry, there's just 2 cop-out answers.
Oh.
I've given you stations that still exist that haven't been completely demolished. Do you know? I'll tell you what. Buxton. Buxton had these two lovely twin stations, and only one of the stations' end walls and a platform exists still at Buxton, but they had two effectively almost twin stations either side of a roadway. By competing companies, but the local the local MP or local lord said you had to build them exactly the same. They were grand and they were fabulous. That's an important loss.
Mm-hmm.
That's what I'm sad about.
Gareth says he can talk about platforms. Well, maybe Gareth can come on again another time.
Another day,
Yes.
Gareth.
So I think we'll wrap it up there. I mean, sorry, there's a couple of questions we didn't get to, but unfortunately we've run out of time. But thank you everybody for joining us. So on the next one, we have my colleague and friend Nikki Forsdyke from the York Management School. We're going to talk about railway branding, past, present, and future, and we're going to sort of touch on how that developed in the 19th century and 20th century, and perhaps some discussion about, well, we are going to talk about branding today and how that develops and how some companies, should we say, they trade off history. I want to raise again the MA in Railway Studies. We are just about full for that, so if you're interested, please do get in touch. This is the University of York's 3-year, completely online, part-time MA in Railway Studies. It's not simply railway studies, it's not a nuts and bolts history. We do everything from the social, economic, political, environmental history of the railways, but we also look at other transport modes and where the railways sit, and individual mobility, how people moved, the changes in mobility in Britain from the 1820s right up to 2010. So yes, there's that. And Tim, can you please talk about what's up on your show tomorrow night? The Railways the Architecture Built.
Great content, terrible presenter.
Yes.
Tomorrow night is brilliant, actually. Tomorrow we're doing the Stockton Darlington Railway, so we're doing looking at the Shildon Railway Institute, which is a glorious kind of neo-Georgian building in Shildon. And we're going to look at the oldest. It's lovely. Oh, it's fabulous. It's Daniel Adams' coach house, which is this on the world's oldest railway sort of stations. Actually, it really is. Again, they took the carriage inside it to put you on there. You bought your tickets inside in the pub and the tavern, and got on the train and go out of it. So again, early railway architecture. And Skerne Bridge near Darlington. We've got the Chappel Viaduct, made from millions of bricks in Essex. We go down the Stockholm Metro to look at different Stockholm Metro stations, which are just out of this world. And then we go and look at the Hitachi train assembly facility at Newton Aycliffe to go and see how they build Azumas and Class 800 Great Western trains. So kind of like everything on the site of locomotion, effectively. Mm-hmm. So it's a whole. There's just a range of railway buildings galore.
That's
just
tomorrow,
lovely. Just
at 8 p.m. on Yesterday channel.
Yes.
And you can catch up if you miss it on UK TV Play. So
it's been surprisingly popular, I have to say. Yes, it's surprised. Am I allowed to talk about viewer numbers?
I don't know.
It's been, or I say it's gone very well.
I'm
very thankful that people like what we've done. It's very nice. Well, thank you if you watched it. It's cheers.
It's everybody tune in. It's great. It's a great show. I'm thoroughly enjoying it.
Well, you're in it.
Well, I'm in it. Yeah, I'm like that guy who goes onto the Amazon to review my own book, aren't I?
Oh, you and me both. Well, thank you for having me tonight.
Tim, it's been fantastic. Everybody, thank you for joining. Sorry I didn't get shout out to everybody, I know, but thank you for joining. Thank you for your questions, and we'll see you next week in the tavern. So tune in.